It began with a sound no one else could hear. A deep, wet crack, like the earth itself breaking its back. The voice cut through the damp morning air at the community center construction site, sharp and laced with the condescension of someone who'd never held a tool that wasn't brand new. Battalion Chief Miller stood with his arms crossed, a human barricade in a crisp yellow turnout coat, blocking the path to the main water manifold. Before him stood Elias Vance, his hands tucked into the worn pockets of his coveralls, his face a roadmap of a life lived long and hard. He just watched, his gaze fixed not on the bustling firefighters calibrating their new sensor array, but on the complex web of pipes behind the chief, as if listening for a secret it refused to share with anyone else. "Your digital ghosts can't hear what's coming, Miller." The old man's voice was quiet, a low rumble of certainty. "That's a pressure differential you can't measure. It's a sound." Miller's laugh was short, dismissive. "A sound. My $500,000 acoustic imaging system reads negative. Your ears, Vance, are obsolete." The insult was clear. He turned his back, a final dismissal. "The only thing humming is your imagination." But beneath their feet, a low, persistent thrum was building, a vibration felt more than heard, a warning Elias alone understood. The world dissolved, replaced by the quiet order of his small workshop, a sanctuary where every tool had a story etched into its handle. While Elias ran his thumb across the brass listening rod, 40 feet away at the community center, a small crack in the kindergarten classroom floor began to sweat, a single sign of the subterranean war he was about to get pulled into. His hands, those weathered maps of his 62 years, moved with a ritualistic care over his custom pipe wrenches. They were not store-bought. They were extensions of his will, forged and ground to his exact specifications, their jaws worn smooth from decades of gripping the impossible. He ran a thumb over the brass listening rod his own father had given him, a device no more complex than a stethoscope, yet infinitely more perceptive than any digital sensor. It heard the truth of the metal, the groan of fatigue, the whisper of a hairline crack spreading like a secret. A memory surfaced, unbidden. A small girl with his same serious eyes sitting on this very stool. "Listen, Leah," he'd said, placing the rod against a copper pipe. "Hear that? A steady hum, good flow. Now this one. A faint, irregular ticking, like a tiny hammer. That's a joint about to fail. It's talking to us." The phone's shrill ring shattered the memory. It was the site foreman, his voice tight with a panic he was trying to suppress. Elias listened for 3 seconds to the description of the problem. A sudden pressure drop in the new sprinkler system, sensors showing nothing. His eyes went immediately to the listening rod. "They're looking in the wrong place. The failure isn't in the new work. It's in the old iron main feeding it, the one your sensors can't see, the one about to let go." Chaos greeted him. The community center was now a stage for flashing lights and the organized frenzy of a full first response. Fire trucks clogged the access road, their diesel engines adding a layer of noise to the already tense atmosphere. Every firefighter moved with purpose, but their purpose was directed by the glowing screens of handheld units, by the calm, authoritative voice of Chief Miller relaying data that was clean, data that was wrong. Elias parked his beat-up truck on the periphery, a ghost at the edge of their digital feast. He moved through the activity unseen, a figure of worn denim in a sea of technical fabric and reflective tape. He didn't need to get close to the main valve assembly they were all focused on. He stopped 50 feet away, near a storm drain grate, and just listened. The sound was wrong. It wasn't the sharp hiss of a leak in the pressurized new plastic pipe they were monitoring. This was deeper, a wet, grinding rumble coming from the earth itself, from the direction of the original foundation. "It's not here." The voice, when he finally used it, was calm, but carried. "It's in the old main under the east wing. You're wasting time." He didn't just see a water leak. His mind's eye saw the tiny, brightly colored chairs in the kindergarten classroom, now separated from a catastrophic breach by only 3 inches of failing concrete. Miller turned, his face a mask of controlled irritation at the interruption. "Vance, I told you to stay out of this. This is a technical operation, not a plumbing call." "Stay out of our way, old man." The command was meant to humiliate, to reinforce the hierarchy. Elias didn't flinch. He just stood there, his hands back in his pockets, his mind already mapping the building's hidden anatomy. He traced the water flow backward from the new manifold, through the concrete wall to the century-old rust-weakened iron pipe buried beneath the kindergarten classroom. He could see the fracture spreading in his mind's eye, a black line spiderwebbing through brittle metal, a catastrophe counting down in seconds, not minutes. He saw the water weight, the force waiting to be unleashed in the tiny chairs just on the other side of that failing wall. The tension began to coil tight, a silent spring loading within Elias as Miller's team huddled around their screens. Green lights glowed across their displays, a cascade of false assurances. "All systems nominal, Chief. Pressure stabilizing." The young technician's report was a death sentence wrapped in clinical language. Elias watched the chief's shoulders relax with vindication, saw the dismissive glance thrown his way. The old man's imagination. But Elias's own senses screamed the truth. The grinding rumble had deepened, mutating into a wet, gravelly cough that vibrated up through the soles of his boots. It was the sound of ancient iron fatiguing, of threads shearing under a pressure differential their pristine sensors were never designed to comprehend. They were listening for a whisper in a modern library when the scream was coming from a tomb buried deep underground. A sharp crack, like a giant snapping a tree branch, echoed from the east wing. It was followed not by a geyser, but by a sinister hiss as pressurized water began carving a path through the foundation soil, undermining everything above it. A young firefighter, the one who'd glanced at Elias before, jerked his head up from his screen. "Sir? The acoustic imager is picking up something. Subsurface. It's not in the schematic." His eyes flickered from the confusing data on his screen to Elias's still, certain form 50 feet away, the first crack in his faith in the technology. Miller waved a hand, not even looking. Ground settling. "It's an old building. The sensors are sensitive. Focus on the primary system." The dismissal was absolute, a testament to faith in technology over the evidence of the Earth itself. Elias could stay silent no longer. The risk was no longer theoretical. "It's not settling. The main is breaching. You have a hydraulic hammer building under the kindergarten slab. You need to evacuate that wing. Now." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a terrifying certainty that finally made Miller turn fully toward him, his patience evaporating. "Vance, that's enough. Your anecdotal nonsense is a distraction I will not tolerate. This operation is based on data, not on the ramblings of a retired plumber." The pause was intentional, the insult hanging in the air thicker than the diesel fumes. The final command was delivered with cold, bureaucratic finality. "You are compromising a municipal emergency response. Leave the site, now." The world seemed to narrow for Elias. The order was given, the authority was clear. To disobey was to invite arrest, to ruin what was left of his quiet life. But he saw the fracture lines in his mind, saw the water pooling, the weight above it, the tiny chairs, the brightly colored tables, the walls soon to become a trap. The young firefighter was staring at him now, his eyes wide, the first crack in the wall of dogma. He looked from Elias's grave, certain face to his chief's arrogant one, and doubt, profound and terrifying, entered his soul. It was the last thing Elias saw before he turned away from the command post, not toward his truck, but toward the east wing. He had been dismissed, but the building was still talking to him, and its voice had become a scream. The first shudder was not a sound, but a tremor through the earth, a deep visceral groan that traveled up through the concrete and into the bones of every person standing there. It was the building's final warning. Then, the east wing of the community center seemed to sigh, a section of the foundation slab sinking a full inch with a grinding shriek of tortured rebar. The hiss became a roar. A jet of black silt-laden water exploded from a seam in the concrete floor, not in the main hallway where the sensors were aimed, but 30 feet away, directly under the doorway of the kindergarten classroom. The digital readouts on Miller's console flickered from green to a confused, blinking yellow. then to a catastrophic, screaming red. The system had finally seen it, a full 30 seconds after it had already killed them. While the firefighters recoiled in shock, their training momentarily frozen by the sheer inaccuracy of their own technology, Elias was already moving. He did not run toward the explosion of water. He moved parallel to it, his eyes fixed on a small, rusted access hatch set into the wall further down the corridor. A forgotten relic from the original construction, a manual override for the system they said couldn't fail. The roar of the water was deafening, a terrifying force chewing through the foundation. The floor beneath his feet was already slick, the water rising fast, cold and brutal. Miller's voice boomed over the chaos, ordering a retreat, calling for evacuation. The teams fell back, a disciplined withdrawal from a danger they could finally see. Elias waded forward. The water was at his knees, then his thighs, the current pulling at him with shocking strength. Each step was a battle against the freezing torrent, his heavy boots sliding on the now unstable floor. He reached the hatch, the iron wheel sealed shut by decades of paint and corrosion. He braced himself against the wall, the water pounding against his back, and set his weight against it. His shoulders screamed in protest, the old muscles straining against the immovable object. This was the physical toll, the unseen sacrifice. This was the moment where theory met the brutal, unyielding reality of metal and pressure. He threw his weight again, a grunt of effort lost in the din. The wheel gave a fraction of an inch with a metallic shriek that was more felt than heard. He didn't see the young firefighter who broke from the retreat, slogging through the water to throw his own weight onto the wheel beside him. No words were exchanged. There was only the shared, desperate understanding that the manual shutoff was the only thing that could isolate the rupture now. Together, they strained, muscles corded, boots sliding in the muck. With a final shuddering crack, the wheel broke free and spun. The effect was immediate. The geyser from the floor faltered, sputtered, and then dropped to a gush, then a flow, then a manageable trickle. The roar ceased, replaced by the panting of two exhausted men and the drip of water from the ceiling. The system stabilized. The immediate danger was over. Elias leaned against the wall, his body trembling from the exertion and the cold, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked at the young firefighter, a silent nod passing between them, a transfer of respect, an acknowledgement of a truth that had nothing to do with rank or technology. Then a deep, ominous crack echoed from the compromised ceiling above him. A section of waterlogged drywall and conduit gave way. He had a split second to shove the younger man clear before the weight came down on him. He collapsed into the rising, muddy water, a sharp, white-hot pain exploding in his leg as the truth of his sacrifice became terrifyingly, finally apparent. The roar was gone, replaced by a dripping, hollow quiet that was somehow more terrifying. Chief Miller stood frozen at his command post, the screeching red lights on his console reflecting in his wide, unblinking eyes. His mouth was slightly agape, the arrogance vaporized, replaced by the profound, gut-wrenching realization of his catastrophic error. The data had been a lie. The ghost in the machine had been real, and the old man had been reading its whispers all along. His gaze swept across the receding floodwaters, the ruined floor, and came to rest on the collapsed debris where Elias had fallen. A cold dread, far deeper than the water he stood in, seized his heart. The young firefighter he'd shoved clear was the first to move, scrambling through the muck on his hands and knees. He reached Elias's side, his training kicking in, his voice low and urgent as he checked for a pulse. He found it, thready but there, and his hands went to the section of conduit pinning the old man's leg. He didn't wait for an order. He just started lifting, his own muscles straining, his face a mask of determined focus. Other crew members, seeing his action, rushed to help, their movements now guided by human instinct, not a flawed algorithm. They worked in a grim, efficient silence, the only sounds the squelch of their boots and Elias's shallow, pained breathing. As the medical team stabilized him for transport, a different kind of duty began. Someone gathered Elias's tools from where he'd dropped his weathered bag. The custom wrench had fallen into the sludge, a piece of industrial art coated in grime. When the senior firefighter picked it up, he didn't wipe it clean. He held it, feeling the balance and the weight, a silent acknowledgement that this dirty, obsolete tool was the one thing their million-dollar budget had missed. The custom wrenches, the brass listening rod, they were treated not as discarded equipment, but with a reverence usually reserved for sacred objects. A senior firefighter, his own face etched with the lines of hard experience, carefully loaded them into the cab of the lead engine. The drive to Elias's modest home was conducted in a heavy, reflective silence inside the truck. The weight in the cab wasn't just the tools. It was the collective shame of a profession that had failed to see the master in their midst until it was almost too late. Across town, his daughter Leah watched from the living room window, a knot of mundane worry in her stomach because he was late for dinner. When she saw the fire truck, not an ambulance, turn onto their quiet street, her confusion spiked. It rolled to a stop out front, its lights off, its presence ominous and out of place. Her concern curdled into a sharp, cold fear. Her hand went to the window frame, her eyes searching the cab for a face, for an explanation, for her father. The door of the fire truck opened, but it wasn't a uniformed stranger who stepped out into the fading evening light. It was the entire shift, not as a formal procession, but as a solemn, purposeful gathering. They moved with a quiet coordination that spoke of unspoken agreement. The young firefighter who had fought beside him at the wheel carried the heavy leather tool bag, its weight a tangible proof of the burden Elias had borne alone. Two others followed, bearing the long custom pipe wrenches across their shoulders, like honor guards carrying rifles for a fallen comrade. They moved past Leah's frozen form at the window and around the side of the small house to the detached workshop, their movements respectful and precise. They knew where it was without being told. Inside the sanctuary of order, they placed each tool with deliberate care. The wrenches were hung on their familiar hooks. The listening rod was set gently on its designated shelf. They wiped the mud from their boots on the mat outside before entering. A small, profound gesture of respect for the domain of a master. They were restoring the world to its rightful balance. As they finished, Chief Miller's personal vehicle pulled up behind the truck. His walk to the front door was slow, heavy with a weight no manual could ever describe. The confidence that had defined his posture was gone, replaced by a slumped humility. He stood on the porch, a man stripped of his authority, holding only the stark, uncomfortable truth. Leah opened the door before he could knock. Her face was pale, her eyes searching his for an answer he felt utterly unworthy to give. He didn't offer excuses. He didn't quote protocols or censor malfunctions. He simply met her gaze, his own filled with a raw, unvarnished shame, and delivered the only line that mattered, the only thing that could possibly bridge the chasm his arrogance had created. His voice was low, stripped of all its former command, leaving only a stark, humbled truth. "We brought your father's tools home." The title was not a job description anymore. It was a title of respect, earned in blood and validated by failure. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't say anything else. The unspoken understanding passing between them was more powerful than any apology. It was the acknowledgement of a sacrifice he had dismissed, a mastery he had mocked, and a debt that could never fully be repaid. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, then turned and walked back to his car, leaving the crew to complete their quiet vigil. Later, under the dim light of a single bulb in the workshop, his tools rested where they belonged, silent. Testaments to the day, quiet mastery spoke louder than any alarm. If this story of unseen sacrifice and earned respect moved you, honor it by sharing it with someone who values true craftsmanship. Subscribe for more tales of the quiet professionals who hold our world together, one pipe, one wire, one silent act of courage at a time.